Hello everyone and welcome to the very new Vampire the Masquerade related video. Today we're going to cover the lore of another clan, Clan Gangrel. A clan that you guys asked me about a lot, and I saw that a lot of you are actually fans of this particular brand of vampires. And I think it's the best time to cover them, as much as they are not announced to be a playable clan of Bloodlines 2, at least yet. They seem to have a very interesting lore and approach to the clan itself in the V5, the newest version of Vampire the Masquerade, which I believe broadened the whole view on Gangrel, and I would be very glad to share it with you. But let's start with the very basics. The name. Gangrel in the archaic Middle British apparently means a wandering beggar, vagrant, wanderer, or walker. And I feel like this is a perfect basic definition of Clan Gangrel, which was a nomadic clan for all of its existence. They are also known to be the feral clan, the wild clan, the clan of loners that prefer the wilderness and very often either the company of themselves or the animals to the company of other vampires or mortals. I think this feral aspect should be very much underlined when we talk about Gangrel, but not to some extent as people do that. Think about animals and animalistic behaviors and try to apply them to a modern person, even a businessman. There's a lot of common tropes, behaviors, instincts that you could find, and Gangrels ultimately base on these instincts and behave according to them. Now, going with this comparison, let's think about the ancient clan Gangrel as a pack of wolves, moving from one place to place, always changing the location they were in, passing the histories of the road, of the path that they took, to their children from their elders. That's why the history of Clan Gangrel is very difficult to tell, because not only the clan has a lot of storytellers, but also it has a lot of oral storytellers. Mostly the ones that do not actually use the quill and an ink to record their whole history. So you can only imagine that the history being passed from the father to a son, from a sire to a child, was very often different in various parts of the world. It's just a thing with a story, when you pass it from one person to the other, it always starts to differ at some point. But fortunately, there are some common tropes in all of these stories, from which we can describe what could have been the Gangrel's history. And it always draws back to the mother figure. While Toreadors actually say it's a father, and they actually make the Gangrel antediluvian male in their stories, but let's not trust the Toreadors, shall we? Enoia is the name of the Gangrel's antediluvian, and there are a lot of stories about her which differ a lot. But one of the most common ones is the story where she actually was a daughter of Lilith, abandoned by her mother and raised by a pack of wolves in the wilderness. She apparently mated with one of the wolves and created the werewolves. Cool history, werewolf bros. And later on she actually reached the city of Enoch, and there she was embraced and became the mother of Clan Gangrel. This history is of course different depending on which Gangrel you will ask about it, but later on what happened with her also has some common tropes to it. First of all, she was always said to be a brave warrior kind of a figure connected with nature. Second, a very important detail that also repeats in many histories. She was either a friend, a sister, sibling, twin, or maybe a lover of the Ravnos antediluvian. That's another clan that I would love to do a video about one day, because they're very interesting and they are still waiting for their V5 lore. Clan Gangrel and Ravnos are very similar to each other in terms of their nomadic behavior. They also have a lot of connections to Roma people, and they do tend to take protection over them. But it is said that historically Enoia's followers, or her childer, were the strong ones, the brave ones, the warrior types, while Ravnos and his followers were more smart and cunning. The name of Ravnos Antediluvian and who exactly he was to Enoia is different depending on the story, but the common trope is that they unfortunately had a big argument, or they started fighting or waging a big war. Some stories say that they actually waged a huge war with armies only at night so the gods wouldn't see that. Other stories actually say that they were lovers, but Enoia got bored of it and she killed Ravnos, but then got captured by his followers. Anyway, all the stories end with a war that is lost on the Gangrel part. And after Ravnos defeated Enoia, her childer, the Gangrel, they spread around the world difficult. Those who went east were mostly killed, and not many of them survived. And those who went west, they spread, survived, and they are the sires of the known gangrel today. Because of their connection to nature, gangrels survived very often by burying themselves underground, not to meet the sun. They always stood in the wilderness, and because of that, they had very little to do with the establishment of Rome, with the establishment of the modern civilization in the ancient times. They preferred to stick to the tribal folk up until the Dark Ages, when the paganism started to be slowly pushed away by Christianity, which was pretty bad for gangrel, because they could actually pose as gods with their animalistic features to those pagan tribes. And this is the way how they often fed. The only place where gangrel were very much in power in comparison to other kindred was Scandinavia, where Odin was known to be of clan gangrel, and he also posed as this god kind of a figure. Apparently Odin is still somewhere in Sweden waiting to be waken up, so Swedish people, beware. From the medieval times up to the modern age, gangrel were slowly pushed more and more to be the outcasts, with the deforestation happening, with the civilization slowly spreading around the world. Gangrels had harder and harder time of feeding and finding their own place, hence being pushed again to this nomadic style of living and moving from one place to the other. A lot of people might ask, why exactly did gangrel ally with the Camarilla? Camarilla doesn't seem to be the perfect place for them when you focus on their character, on their history, on what things were important to clan gangrel. The thing is, they did have common enemies, and at first they also had common beliefs. Gangrel were always very much against diablerie. Most of the gangrel were also pretty okay with keeping the masquerade, and their main concern was coming from the humans. The tales of those who possessed the true faith were spread among the gangrel, and they feared them. They feared that the mortals will eventually hunt them, find them. Because of all that, Camarilla at first seemed to be a good choice, although a lot of gangrel still remained as autarkies, the independent vampires that didn't want to belong to any sect, or didn't even get involved in politics in general, because they were always wandering somewhere, nowhere for others to find. The question is whether the choice to pick Camarilla for clan gangrel was good in general. At first it seemed to be, but as the time passed and we went to the modern age, it slowly turned out not to be the best place for the clan. And there are so many reasons. Gangrels were always perceived as the low clan, so they always had lesser rights and the worst time within the faction. They also historically didn't really like the Tremere. In the Dark Ages they actually allied with the Tzimisce in the war against them. And their hatred towards diablerie, yeah, after Tremere got very much included into the Camarilla, gangrels weren't very happy about that. The hierarchy, the structure, the lessening independence of gangrel within the faction, and worst of all, how Camarilla tried to affect the gangrel storytelling, which was ultimately one of the biggest things about the clan. They always posed these histories about kindred. They were the ones that documented them. They were the ones that kept the word going. Camarilla feared that, as any organization would. They wanted to tell their version of the history. A lot of the things that gangrel were talking about were not up to their political agenda. All of these things caused gangrel to slowly say no, which ended with them majorly joining Anarch faction these days. Naturally, most of them still remain independent, but gangrels at large joined the Anarch faction. There are also plenty of gangrel in Sabbat, and they mutated a bit and differ in between the city gangrel and country gangrel. They had a little bit different disciplines depending on whether they were majorly in the cities or majorly in the countryside, as the city ones would actually need the celerity and obfuscate to survive by and large. And this actually leads me to one interesting point about clan gangrel. Their vitae is known historically to be quite mutable. It did mutate into many different little bloodlines, and ultimately there was no one definition of what a true gangrel should be, because they had a lot of different disciplines and abilities, and even sometimes the differences in between their banes, depending on where they were from and which gangrels they originated from. It's a thing with all of the nomadic organisms, really. When you have a species that moves from one place to the other, depending on where the path leads them, they will differ from one one another. And that was the thing back in the days, and nowadays it actually evolved in Gangrel, owning a variety of different disciplines, depending on how you want to roleplay them. In majority, Gangrel possesses disciplines of animalism, fortitude, and protean. Animalism allows them to either adopt their own pets or affect the pets of others, or maybe just hunt in the forest without being bothered by boars or wolves. They have a connection with the wilderness, and by that they also have the connection with animals. Not all gangrels actually have an animal or live with animals. Sometimes they actually become the animal themselves using the discipline of protean, but animalism is a very common choice and a pick for the clan. Fortitude is the second one, which is originating from the warrior-esque background of Clan Gangrel. They were very often used as guards, as protectors of the other clans. And also, as a nomad, you do need that fortitude to survive in a lot of different circumstances. Protean, though, that is the discipline in which gangrels usually specialize in. Protean, very simply speaking, is actually a shape-shifting. You can actually change your body to have a little bit more of the animalistic features, or even totally change into an animal. Clothes that help you in unarmed fights, scale on your skin that protects you from the shots, or becoming a wolf that can very quickly run throughout the forest. It's a very useful discipline, which was also displayed wonderfully by Beckett in Bloodlines game. Remember that sweet little wolf that was following you at the beginning of the game and then suddenly appeared after you blowed up the warehouse? That is a display of the discipline Protean. And when you think about, well, turning into wolves, living in the wilderness, and having connection to nature, you may wonder whether they have any connection with werewolves, actually. Well, yes and no. If you remember in Vampire the Masquerade Redemption, Eric, the gangrel, actually mentions that you can pass through the forest safely because they have some kind of a pact with werewolves. That wouldn't normally work very easily, but it is to some extent possible. Now I need to state that in majority of the cases, if you are of Clan Gangrel, do not approach a werewolf. You will be eaten alive. All vampires, no matter of the clan, they stink of worm, something that werewolves hate the most, something that werewolves were made to abolish, to push away from the earth, which never succeeded for many of the factors, but one of the factors is the freaking spreading vampires everywhere. So all vampires are wormish to werewolves. But the vampires of the high humanity, they do not stink as badly. And if on top of that they are gangrel and they keep to themselves, they live in a wolf form in the forest, not getting in the way of the werewolf pack and just trying to keep to themselves, maybe they can pass. There is no friendship whatsoever, there is no love in between werewolves and gangrel. But out of all of the clans of Vampire the Masquerade, if there is one that can maybe survive with a werewolf diplomatically, that will be probably gangrel. But again, don't count on my word, because if you're a gangrel and you're going to go to the forest right now to say hello to your fellow werewolf, you will die. Now let's talk about the archetypes of Clan Gangrel, the possible embraces into the clan. A very interesting topic, something that was majorly introduced by the V5, and as much as the V5 core book is a little bit stereotypical about some of the archetypes, for example Toriator and Ventru, they are not gifted with very unstereotypical archetypes. Gangrels, they did get pretty cool ones, and I feel like they can really expand your view on that particular clan. The very first archetype that is mentioned by the book is a little bit specific. It's an uncaged jailbird. The basic of this archetype is a freed prisoner, and it can be either a literal prisoner who spent a lot of time behind the bars and got free and never wants to be behind the bars again, or maybe you can actually treat it a little bit more metaphorically. Imagine a housewife that was stuck and jailed at home with her family and kids forever. Imagine a person who was a prisoner of their workplace, couldn't change a job, couldn't find a new one, had to provide for the family. They always had the same office around them and the same place that they had to go to every day. These people have free souls, but their bodies are entrapped in a singular place, and that awakens the beast inside of them. They want to run, they want to feel that freedom that the horse feels when he gallops through the fields, that birds feel when they fly across the sky. You know, the animal comparisons do really work for most of the gangrel archetypes. And then they get embraced, and that frees them. And since that moment, they do not ever want to be imprisoned by anyone. They will go on their own path, they will most likely rebel against their sires, they will most likely rebel against the sects. They will never join the Camarilla if they had to bother with stuff like that during their lifetime. And they will go on a path of wonderful adventures, which leads us to the second archetype, the adventurer. Imagine a hitchhiker, imagine a hippie who goes throughout the from one coast to another. Imagine a beatnik from the Beat Generation, Jack Kerouac on the road. Imagine a vagabond who goes from place to place, or one of those great travelers that you watch in the TV. All of those people go either around the globe or around their own area. The span doesn't have to be big, but wherever they go, they experience adventures, and they have a lot of stories to tell. This is a very common archetype for Clan Gangrel, and I think Beckett partially is an adventurer. I mean, okay, he's totally an adventurer, but there's another archetype to which he fits, about which I'm going to talk after this one. But yeah, imagine that after Embrace, the whole world opens in front of you and you can do whatever you want with it. Why not explore it and try to find every little story hidden behind it? And about the stories and the storytelling, a very important aspect of Clan Gangrel, there is another archetype called the folk favorites. For me personally, Beckett from the video game fits that trope wonderfully because he tells you a lot of these stories. He's really awesome to listen to. When he starts talking about the kindred history, you don't want him to stop. You sit on the couch and listen to him talk forever. And folk favorites just do that. They collect the stories. They can be anyone from a Native American chieftain standing over the fireplace and talking to people around them the stories of his ancestors, to a person on a TED Talk, to a stand-upper who shares the story from their lifetime with a crowd of people. Or maybe that one friend that everyone knows who always has the stories at the bar table. Which is funny because I feel a lot of people do not combine charisma as a stat with gangrels a lot. Then you have a very interesting archetype, which is the director of the board. Because the wolves do not live in forests only. You also have wolves of Wall Street. You also have alphas and betas in the office business environment. Everywhere you go, you can draw the comparisons to animal world, and the corporative world is no different. Imagine this brave, courageous, pushy boss that drives the company forward by a strong hand and has all the assets that he needs to make this company successful, sans for his short temper. Imagine a tourist city and a street with many different souvenir shops, all selling the same thing, but then you have this one seller, one trader who goes out on the street and basically forces you to go to his particular shop, because else you're going to regret it. The alpha of the pack, every other seller looking at him like he's the boss, fearing him for some reason, and actually cawing behind him because that is the loudest, most charismatic or the strongest member of the pack. We do have people like that around us as well, and maybe a gangrel sire is looking to have a nice alpha child, someone who could potentially be a good alpha in the future because they believe that this will enlarge their chances of survival. And last but not least, we have the unrepentant beasts, a vampire who even during their mortal life behaved like an animal, a predatory criminal, maybe an addict whose addiction pushed him to all of these wild behaviors, maybe a businessman whose strategies were very feral, very brutal, maybe a drunkard in a bar who's always acting on his instincts when he gets drunk. These kindred weren't the best people when they were mortals, and they are not that much different after the embrace. It's just that it's a different thing that drives them wild. As for their bane, the clan curse, it actually changed throughout the years, but it was always revolving around the same thing, more or less. Gangrels in the modern times, they do get one or more animalistic features during frenzy, and after the frenzy is over, these features still remain for one night as some kind of a symbol of the mistakes that they have done. I think in the first editions these features were permanent, and then in the V20 they were turned temporary. But in general, it is a thing for Clan Gangrel that when they frenzy, they suddenly grow claws, or their eyes turn to look like cat eyes, or they suddenly get feathers on their arms, or maybe they get a tail, or maybe they get a cute snoot. But whatever it is, and however cute it looks like, all kindred know better not to make fun of a gangrel who has these features on them, because that means that recently the gangrel has lost control, and there are a lot of reasons to believe that they may lose control again. There's no mockery involved, vampires usually know better, and if your little fledgling starts to mock another gangrel like that, you better slap their face and say shut up, because they're going to lead you in trouble. They also have a very interesting compulsion nowadays, compulsion that can be triggered depending on the dice rolls that you have in the game. During their compulsion, gangrel return to their animalistic state. Suddenly the speech is hard, the clothes turn to be uncomfortable, the social norms cease to exist for them. All the arguments are best settled with teeth and claws. All the roles involving manipulation and intelligence get the penalty, and gangrel can only speak in one-word sentences during that time. So imagine you have this boss who is a gangrel, this alpha wolf of Wall Street, and he gets very mad for some reason. He really wants to destroy everyone in the room. But as he tries not to frenzy, and as he fights the urge to basically murder everyone around, he just says singular words throughout all this time. You cannot get anything more elaborate from him when he is in that state. The compulsion, for example, of Clan Ventru would be that they need to assert dominance over someone else. So when the compulsion hits in a similar environment, at the same table with the Wolf of Wall Street, there's a Ventru boss who would immediately want to make someone their peasant. The gangrels would be the ones that try to tame their beast by saying single words. Not the best boss to have, but then again, I think it's a better one than the Toreador one. Anyway guys, that's all about Clan Gangrel. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you like this new approach to Clan Gangrel. There can be a wild beast both in the forest or a countryside and in the middle of a city in a tall skyscraper. Give me your interesting ideas for Gangrel characters, and remember, a very good way of making a gangrel vampire would be to think about the comparisons to animals. Share yours with me and let's see each other in another video. Don't get lost in the night. Goodbye.